She barged onto my property with papers in her hand and shouted, "You're finished! You destroyed HOA property!" I stood there, staring at the empty patch of land where the cabin used to be, and I almost laughed. That cabin? The one she and her board secretly built without ever asking me? It was sitting on my land, and I had every right to tear it down. But Karen? She wasn't about to let facts get in her way. She waved those documents like they were the Constitution and yelled about lawsuits, damages, and community property rights. I stayed calm, even though my blood boiled. She had trespassed, built an entire structure without consent, then tried to make me look like the criminal. Neighbors peeked from their porches, whispering as Karen kept ranting louder and louder. She wanted a scene. She wanted me humiliated. "You pay for this," she hissed. "My lawyers are already preparing the case." I tilted my head and gave her the smallest smile. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just some random landowner. I had proof, signed deeds, survey maps, and even county permits that placed every inch of this soil under my name. And if she thought dragging me to court would bury me, she had no idea that the person waiting for her there was someone she never wanted to face.
Karen didn't waste a second. The very next morning, I saw a sheriff's cruiser parked outside my driveway. She had actually filed the lawsuit overnight and convinced the deputy to serve me papers like I was some criminal. She stood right behind him, arms crossed, smirking like she had already won. The deputy read off the notice, "You're being sued for destruction of HOA property and unlawful demolition." My stomach twisted, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't believe she was this reckless. She actually thought the law was on her side. "Sir, you'll need to appear in court within 2 weeks," the deputy said, handing me the envelope. I nodded calmly, but Karen couldn't resist. She leaned in close and whispered, "You won't survive this. We own the judge in this county." That was her mistake. I didn't flinch, didn't give her the satisfaction. I simply said, "Then I guess court will be interesting." Because what she didn't know was that the judge she bragged about knowing wasn't just my acquaintance, he was family. And Karen was about to find out what happens when you try to play games on the wrong person's land. Court day came faster than I expected. The room was packed, neighbors whispering in the back, curious to see if Karen would finally crush me. She walked in dressed like she was running for office, pearl necklace, fake smile, and a thick folder in her hand. Her lawyers sat on both sides of her, ready to put on a show. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Karen smirked, certain this was her territory, but the moment the judge looked up and his eyes met mine, her confidence flickered. He froze for just a second before nodding. Because that county judge Karen bragged about, he was my older brother. Karen didn't know where to look. She tried to laugh it off, whispering to her lawyer, "This won't matter." But the color drained from her face when my brother began reading the case file. Plaintiff claims damages for demolition of a cabin built without permits on land legally deeded to the defendant, he said slowly, his gaze cutting to her. The room went silent. Karen shifted in her seat, her smirk collapsing into a nervous twitch. I leaned back, calm as ever. For the first time, she realized she wasn't standing on HOA ground anymore. She was standing in my house, and the walls were closing in. Karen's voice cracked the silence before the judge could go further. She jumped up, pointing at me like a child caught lying. "He's manipulating this court. This is a conflict of interest. Your Honor, you can't possibly be fair if he's your brother." The gallery gasped. Whispers spread like fire. For a moment, it looked like Karen had scored a point, but my brother didn't flinch. He removed his glasses, stared her down, and said, "You're right. Family or not, justice must be impartial. That's why I've already arranged for an independent federal judge to review this case, and they're arriving right now."
The doors swung open, and in walked a stern-looking federal judge with a briefcase. Karen's face turned white. She clearly hadn't expected backup from higher courts. Her lawyer scrambled to object, waving papers, trying to stall, but the federal judge cut him off sharply. "I've reviewed the deed, permits, and survey records. Unless you have legal proof this HOA owned the land, this case is already sinking." Karen panicked. She started whispering frantically to her board members in the front row, but it was too late. The walls she built around her fake power were starting to crumble, and everyone in that room could see it. Karen wasn't done yet. Her desperation made her reckless. She snapped her fingers at one of the board members sitting nervously in the front row. He hesitated, then carried a large binder up to the judge. "Here," Karen shouted, her voice trembling but loud enough to shake the room. "These are HOA records proving we've maintained that cabin for years. Taxes, upkeep, community dues, all of it." The federal judge flipped through the binder slowly. The audience leaned forward, hanging on every page turn. Karen's grin started to return, until the judge frowned and tapped a page with his pen. "These documents, they're forged." His voice cut like a blade. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Karen's lawyer nearly dropped his pen. The judge lifted his eyes to her. "These dates don't match the county tax records, and this signature belongs to a man who passed away 3 years ago." Karen stammered, "That's a clerical error." I finally leaned forward and set my folder on the table. "If we're talking about records," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "maybe the court should see the actual land survey, the one filed with the state, not the HOA. I slid the papers across. They weren't just surveys. They were drone images, time-stamped, showing Karen's crew building that cabin without permits on my property. The federal judge raised his brows. Karen's mouth fell open. In that instant, the case shifted. She wasn't the accuser anymore. She was the accused. Karen's meltdown came fast and ugly. She shot up from her seat, slamming her palms on the table. "This is all lies! He set me up! He's tricking the whole court!" Her voice cracked, rising higher with every word. The gallery erupted with murmurs, neighbors recording her with their phones, catching every second of her breakdown. The federal judge banged the gavel. "Order in the court!" But Karen wouldn't stop. She pointed at me again, her face red and twisted. "You think you can embarrass me? You think your little papers scare me? I own this community!" My brother, sitting silently beside the federal judge, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but each word cut deeper than a shout. "No, Karen. You trespassed, you forged documents, and you lied under oath. That makes you a criminal." The air froze. Karen's lawyers quietly slid their chairs back, distancing themselves from her. She looked around desperately for support, but even her board members lowered their heads, refusing to meet her eyes. And then came the final blow. The federal judge leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Mrs. Howard, based on the evidence and your own conduct here today, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for prosecution. This trial isn't about him anymore. It's about you." Karen staggered back like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. The room exploded with whispers, and for the first time, she looked small, powerless, cornered. Karen barely made it 3 steps out of the courtroom before 2 deputies stepped forward. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and trespassing," one of them said, snapping cuffs around her wrists. The crowd from inside had followed out, phones still recording, catching every second. She thrashed, screaming, "You can't do this to me! I am the HOA! This is my community!" Her voice cracked into a shriek, but nobody moved to help her. Not even the board members. They just stood frozen, watching their queen fall. The deputies dragged her past me, and for a moment our eyes met. She spat, "You'll regret this." But I only shook my head and whispered, "No, Karen, I'm done regretting. This is justice." The neighbors who once stayed silent started clapping. Some cheered. A few even walked up to me, apologizing for not speaking sooner. One old man muttered, "We were all scared of her. Thank you for standing up." I didn't gloat, didn't throw insults. I just looked out at the lake, the land my family worked for, the soil I owned fair and square, and felt the weight finally lift. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about Karen's arrest. This was about tearing down the false crown she wore and proving that nobody, not even a self-proclaimed HOA queen, stood above the law.
I stood on my porch that evening, the lake glistening under the sunset, and for the first time in months, silence felt like peace. My wife came out with 2 cups of coffee, handed me one, and whispered, "It's finally over." I nodded, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just about winning a case. It was about defending what was mine. Neighbors passed by, some waving, some stopping to say thanks. A few admitted they'd been bullied for years, fined for nonsense rules, and threatened into silence. Karen's reign was over, and they could finally breathe again. I looked out across my land, remembering every sacrifice it took to keep it. My father's hands that built the fences, my own years of service protecting this country, the promise I made to never let anyone take what was ours. And now, watching Karen hauled off in cuffs, that promise felt complete. I took a deep breath and said softly, more to myself than anyone, I didn't fight for this country to be told I can't stand on my own soil. The line hung in the air, carried by the breeze across the lake. And in that moment, I knew justice wasn't just served, it was earned.